Hello, greetings, and welcome everyone to the week 10 of the ASL review. It is Brad back from vacation, me
It's true.
forgetting what I'm doing. This is going to
Also
be a good
true.
week.
Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. Uh, anyway, starting off with match number one here. This was Shadow versus Dirty Logic, and I just realized that I did not prep something for the future, but we will get to that road when we get there. Shadow versus Dirty Logic, and this game was really. It was kind of fun because there were some weird sets. There was one particular really weird set on Dirty Logic's side that made things really interesting. But earlier in the game, a few things happened. Like, big one, Mega Charizard X was ramming itself into Hippowdon and just absolutely destroying itself with Flare Blitz recoil and sand damage. And I don't know, was Hippowdon Rocky Helmet?
Yes, it was Rocky Helmet.
Yeah, so between those things, Charizard pretty much just killed itself after two Flare Blitz. So it got two hits off, but wasn't very meaningful in this match. What was really interesting, though, is Dirty Logic had a Spiritomb set. And this set was Hypnosis, Calm Mind, Dream Eater, and Sucker Punch. And I'm not exactly sure what the plan was here. Like, I see the plan a little bit. Roserade was also Sleep Powder, so it was like a sleep based team, which is really weird when you have Sleep Claws and your opponent can just easily switch out of Dream Eater. It's really weird to have Calm Mind on a set that only has one special attack and can only hit that on one out of the six Pokemon at any given time. And it's also really weird to bring that particular set against a Milotic that's going to try to burn itself and doesn't care about Sucker Punch. Uh,
Additionally, and I don't want to interrupt your flow, but also, as you're considering that, also consider that turn one, Rotom Wash got a Toxic Orb knocked off of it.
oh,
So the plan was for Rotom Wash to trick that Toxic Orb onto something.
yeah, I like halfway realized that, but now that you mention it, so that Spiritomb set just really isn't adding up in my brain. It managed to get like a good hit or two off. I know it got a good hit off on Milotic once. I don't know if it did anything else, but outside of that set, Roserade was pretty good, putting things to sleep, and I believe it had extra sensory. Am I
Mm-hmm.
remembering that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, extra sensory was able to take out Wheezing and Conkeldurr, so that was a really good bring. But other than that, Dirty Logic kind of fumbled around with sleep enough that Orbeetle eventually was able to come in and set up with a stored power set and sweep the game away.
Yeah, I mean, Roserade on paper was the best mon in this matchup. Knowing that it has extra sensory, it hit the Conkeldurr, it hit the Weezing, that also had grass moves to hit the Hippowdon and the Milotic, and it looked like it to me at Team Preview, not knowing the Rosary had extra sensory, but hoping that it did, that this was another week that Shadow was going to get rocked by a ground type, or excuse me, by a grass type, because that has been a trend somewhat for him lately. And turn one, I saw the Toxic Orb get knocked off, and I was extremely confused by this because you've got Kartana, who's going to be immune to Toxic Orb, right?
Yep.
He's got a Mega that you can't trick it. Of course, the Mega didn't show, but Radiology doesn't know that in prep. He's got the Wheezing, which you figure is probably coming in this matchup, that, doesn't really care. The Milotic is, if you don't get it on the switch in, it's going to be burned. So I thought that that was an odd choice. What I thought would have been a better choice, and this is actually something that I enjoy doing, and I've done this quite a few times, is trick Black Sludge. And you could trick like a black sludge onto a melodic, and that's very annoying because it's already burned. Now it's taking black sludge damage. That can start to rack up and become a real problem. Um, but then you consider that his trigger is a Rotom. Melodic's probably not swapping into Rotom. Powdon's probably not swapping into Rotom. I don't know. It just at turn one, I was like, wait a minute. I don't know where this is headed. Like at turn one, I was like, I'm not quite sure what the plan is there, friend. But go get it. Pulling for you. Um, but he did some good things. The screens were nice. And ultimately, if not for Orbeetle, there's a decent chance Shadow doesn't make it out of this one.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, despite all of the really weird sets, some of it did work to an extent. And in general, I mean, Mega Charizard only got off 2 hits, but they were 2 really big hits. And Roserade was doing work. Togekiss was doing good work. If Orbeetle hadn't set up Calm Mind, Togekiss was probably going to do a lot more work. So, Dirty Logic was certainly not out of this game,
Mhm.
but I don't know. It was just certainly a weird one. That's all I can really say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Um, I would just say that we've seen better Dirty Logic games this season. This was not certainly his strongest week, even though the result almost went his way. Um, I'm a strong believer in just doing the right thing, and bringing the right sets and finding a way to make it work. This time he almost made the wrong sets work, and I don't know that that's ideal.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder, like, if that Spiritomb had been a different set, maybe if it had been Dream Eater Hex, or like Hex versus Milotic sounds amazing.
Sure.
Or something. Like, I don't know. These sets seemed close to working. Just not quite
Yeah.
there.
I don't know. I don't know if I don't know. I know a couple weeks back, Dirty Logic had a really nice week where we really credited his prep, and it became known later on that Dirty Logic did almost all of that week's prep, or if not all of it, by himself, which is great because he's still a growing battler. This week, maybe evidence that he certainly was prepping by himself, because I think Peach probably would have encouraged him to consider a couple of things.
Yeah, which I don't think it's bad at all to experiment with some really out there things. I come up with a lot of weird sets. If I'm not coming up with at least one set in a week that I think is really weird, then it's that's just generally not my prep style. So weird sets can work, and experimenting with weird sets can work, but the thing about them is you have to have a very specific game plan in order to make them work. But
Yeah, it just wasn't his week. It just wasn't his week.
yeah, which
It
that's
wasn't
fine.
in the cards.
That's always fine. Anyone can have a week that isn't theirs.
Yeah. Speaking of weeks that were not theirs, segue awesomeness. Brett versus Dravos was. The words are hard to describe. The word that comes to mind to me is just futility. Brett's Mons just did not do the damage. They just did not do. I mean, when you're talking, I mean, Brett has amazing offensive Mons. I mean, not the least of which is a Nidoqueen that couldn't seem to do above what, maybe 30%.
Yeah, with super
Eh,
effective hits. Like,
it just seemed that whatever he had, it just wasn't enough. Over and over again, he had the Politoed that landed a big focus blast on the Creedilly. 30%. Just now, that being said, Brett had terrible, terrible luck this week. Um, really unfortunate stuff. He had a really kind of neat curse Ferrothorn set that got Fire Punch burned.
Mm-hmm.
In one Fire Punch, mind you. That I don't know how much it mattered because the Ferrothorn, I mean, it would have got it up another curse, but it still would have taken a big chunk from Fire Punch. I don't know where that was heading, but it looked to me as if Aggron was headed toward winning that 1v1. But the burn made it to where it was inconsequential.
Yeah.
But the rest of the match was just this big, long tail of really good offensive mons. Like Politoed in the Rain is a problem. Greninja and Fernape in general are very difficult. Nidoqueen, one of the best versatile attackers in the game, and he just couldn't do the damage.
Yeah, this really seemed like a game that was it was a chip game. And you see games like that where it's just a matter of chipping the opponent down more than they can chip down you until you bring out your cleaner and someone finishes the game. The problem with that is Brett was playing a chip game without recovery, whereas Dravos was playing a chip game with two wish passers.
And recover on Credilli.
Yeah. And also, I mean, you were talking about the luck. Brett got his Ferrothorn burnt, which really sucked. And then Brett actually managed to burn both Alomomola and Sylveon with his Politoed, and he didn't want to burn either of those because he wanted to toxic them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then Dravos did also end up burning Scyther later on, which Scyther was a cool bring. Scyther was actually it dealt 60% to Cradilly with a U-turn. It's the only thing that was able to do over 50 to the Cradilly. And it had defog, so Dravos was doing hazard stacking, doing exactly what we've been saying you should be doing. And I mean, even though Scyther defogged once, it was still a really effective strategy. It did a ton of chip damage. But the Scyther was there to prevent that from being an instant loss, which was good. But yeah, it just really didn't seem like Brett could get the damage done needed.
And it's one of those matches where I think oftentimes, and shame on us as a community, but oftentimes when we look at matches and we look, particularly in the post review, we look at, okay, who did what wrong? And I don't know that that's appropriate because Brett brought some really good mons with really good coverage, had a plan for hazard removal. I think it's more about what Dravos did right, and he brought sets that covered really good options from Brett. I thought Brett's brings were reasonable. I thought the movesets were reasonable. Whoops, kick something. Ignore that. And I just thought Dravos, just everything he brought seemed to work.
Yeah, and I agree with that quite a bit. I think Dravos did definitely bring the sets that needed to be brought. Weavile never even touched the floor. I bet Weavile could have put in a ton of work against Brett. But this may have been sort of a matchup thing because, and I mean, you don't usually want to blame things on matchups.
Sure.
But in this case, Dravos has a team with like Mega Aggron and two Wish Passers and just a whole bunch of bulk and a whole bunch of recovery against Brett's team, which has all season been all about chipping things down with momentum and cleaning with fast, maybe not the strongest powerhouses, but just a lot of chip damage and fast damage, and that wasn't what was needed against Dravos' team.
Yeah. Credit to Dravos, in my opinion. Great play this week. Brought smart sets, played them well. Big win for him.
Yeah, agreed. So, match number 3. This was your match versus Peaches, and this was a really interesting match. Well, I'm gonna start by talking about the turn 1 play. that I found pretty interesting. You had Mega Charizard Y against a Sandaconda, and
Hmm.
I am going off of the fact that I would expect you to have Solar Beam against a team that has Sandaconda and Mega DNC.
Hmm.
You clicked Flamethrower against the Sandaconda turn 1,
Yep.
and it managed to glare your Mega Charizard, which was pretty big, I would say.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I understand that you are probably, well, I talked to you after the game, so of course I know that you were trying to read. I believe you said the Incineroar coming in.
Well, it was two things. Two things. One, his logical switch in is Incineroar, if he wanted to go for that. Two, I've led. Okay. So here's my strat this season. This isn't something that people don't know if you're paying attention. So I'm not revealing some secret, but I am continuing to lead Charizard Y. I've done it a bunch of times. I've done a lot of matches where I'm leading Charizard Y over and over again, and I'm doing it on purpose. Obviously, I am choosing the lead because it's predictable, but I also have a pretty good idea of what is going to come out against it. I was thinking, hoping that he would be Rindo and he would EV his Sanaconda in such a way that it could be pretty offensive, but Rindo would let it live any kind of solar beam. As long as he wasn't some kind of wild HP set, I had a pretty good, I would say, pretty good, more than 50% chance of OHKOing with a flamethrower. And flamethrower obviously is going to do more to the Incineroar. So that was my thought is if he's leading Sandaconda, I've been leading Charizard intentionally over and over so I could pick and kind of play with my lead matchup. Sometimes it's worked for me, sometimes it hasn't, but I've been doing that. So I intentionally did that, hoping that he would have the Rindo, hoping that I would kill him with a flamethrower.
Okay. Yeah. So it looks like you were just. I don't know. Was the Sandaconda's item ever revealed either?
Um,
Because you might
it was
actually.
leftovers.
Okay, it was leftovers. So this seemed to be a case of you just over predicting. But regardless of what happened turn 1, the rest of the match, a lot of it was defined by the fact that you had a lot of really specially bulky Pokemon
Mhm.
that were able to take on the hits from stuff like Kyurem, and I believe Mega Diancie was maybe a special set,
Mhm.
and Yanmega and stuff like that. So your Kaparaja and Silvally were both specially defensive to deal with that, and Incineroar was a fantastic switch in for Peaches all game. The problem with fantastic switches is they get worn down.
Yeah.
Once Incineroar went down, it looked like you really just had free reign. You had just good switches into anything Peaches wanted to do, and a lot of ways to chip down or outright demolish anything that Peaches wanted to switch in himself. So,
Yeah, and I mean that was part of it too. That was part of the Charizard Y choice was because I'm running multi-attack Silvally and I'm looking at his team and he does not take multi-attack well. Incineroar can take it, but it's not going to enjoy it. It has no reliable recovery. So as long as I get a really hard hit on that Sandaconda, then multi-attack from my Silvally is going to be doing a bucket of damage every turn. So, I mean, I still feel like that was a decent choice. I mean, probably, of course, in retrospect, I would have clicked the Solar Beam, but it still brought his Sandaconda to a point where it was useless. And Silvally Fairy and Capraja were really, in my opinion, the story of the game. Capraja getting 2 kills, Silvally getting 2 kills. Um, and I mean, it was a pretty, at least in my estimation, a pretty convincing victory.
yeah, I agree with that. I don't think that Peaches really did any incorrect prepping or anything like that. The only thing I could think is maybe like a Specs Max modest, or maybe not even modest, but like a Specs Max attack Kirim could have maybe done some more damage to break through. Because it really didn't seem like Peaches had many breakers if you did bring bulky sets. Uh, but regardless of that, it was a pretty sound victory from your side. I think you had a lot of good prep and a pretty good game plan throughout it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fun match. I just tip of the cap to Peach. I always love our matches. He's a very, very good coach, and I always look forward to the opportunity to get to play him. It's always a highlight match for me during the season. This one certainly wasn't didn't go his way, but the next one very well may. And so, congrats on a good match, my friend, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, I am. I'm looking forward to Peach's future matches. I mean, not to look too far ahead, but there are a lot of 5-5 teams and stuff like that. The playoff race is going to be really contentious, so I'm looking forward to all of the future games these players are bringing.
Absolutely.
So you want to jump over to match number 4?
No, let's just skip it.
All
Let's
right,
just skip
sounds
it.
good. So match number 5.
So, match for two of the best coaches this season. 6-4, 7-3. Um, both guys are high level guys. If you can't watch their past weeks and don't know that they're high level guys, you just don't know Mons. You just don't. Very good coaches. Both typically have a distinct strategy in trying to get the win. They usually have a fairly similar or repeated path of victory that they're working toward. Um, and this week just felt like none of that was true. This was one of the weirdest weeks for them, man. Um, Torn T was fabulous. Torn T was so powerful and was showing off. But this match was actually one that you and I were watching live together and talking about. And there was just odd things happening over and over again. In my opinion, this is, of course, one person's viewpoint. Odd things happening over and over again. I think I told you around very early in the match. I would say I couldn't tell you what turn, maybe 5 or 6. I told you. I said that was it Poltergeist
Mm-hmm.
was going to shell smash and sweep. That was my prediction for this match. I felt fairly confident that Poltergeist was going to shell smash and sweep because I just didn't see Ian's path to stopping it. Ian would need to get boosted up beforehand so that he can kill Poltergeist when it comes in because it's very fragile. But I just didn't think that was going to happen. IL Kit's too good to provide that opportunity. But just there were turns where I thought that IL Kit's move choice was a little bit too direct to face, where he could have maybe made a bit of a mid ground prediction, is what I would call it, where it was not a hard read necessarily, but in my estimation, a reasonable read where he both could have done damage and also could have punished the switch in that maybe he didn't. Particularly the second ice beam on the Nihilego, in my estimation, was a pretty obvious switch out for Ian. And then he ice beamed the Nihilego and did negligible damage. Then Nihilego, in return, provided the courtesy of grass knotting and incoming Cinderace on what I thought was a pretty obvious swap out again. And just a lot of things that, for two people, in my opinion, are very, very good battlers and both stand a very good chance of beating me on any given day. I thought this was probably one of their more poorly played matches throughout the season at this point. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I kind of have to tend to agree with you because, yeah, like you said, we were watching this live, and there were certainly turns where, I mean, we were saying out loud, okay, this player should do this. And then and it seemed pretty obvious to both of us, and then it didn't happen, and it should have because it would have in fact been the right thing for said player to do. Stuff like that ice beam. There were a few other moves in there, uh, and I find it kind of funny. Earlier on, like you said, turn 3 or 4 or so, you were talking about the Poltergeist, and we were theorizing what the possible counters to that could be. You were saying Aquajet Sharpedo could potentially do it, and I was saying Sharpedo with a double protect is probably the only way.
Mhm.
Unfortunately for IL Kid, Sharpedo with double protect ended up being what happened. And I think that was another weird play because I think that the Sharpedo coming in and clicking protect was really obvious. So, I mean, it's risky, but I think IL Kid certainly should have gone for a Shell Smash while Sharpedo protected, and that would be an immediate victory. Of course, that wouldn't work if the Sharpedo did have Aqua Jet, uh, or if for some reason Ian predicted the second Shell Smash, but I don't know. There were certainly some strange plays going on here.
I mean, even Jolly 252 attack Sharpedo to a no HP Poltergeist is doing 38%. So my thought was that Ian very likely had the Aqua Jet this week instead of the Protect, knock the Poltergeist out. I thought that that was a reasonable bring. And then I do say that is somewhat of a difficult read. It is somewhat of a difficult read to decide to Shell Smash when Ian could click any move and kill. But I do think that the gamble was worth it. I do think the gamble is worth it on turn one. On turn two, you
Yes, yes.
obviously have to attack.
Yeah, you
You
certainly
obviously have
don't.
to attack.
Yeah.
But on turn one, I think I would say that's a 50-50, but I think it was a 50-50 for me in favor of clicking the Shell Smash. In particular, because if you watch the flow of the game, both of them are clicking face over and over and over again. And what I mean by clicking face, if you don't understand that concept, is attacking what's in front of you and not what could potentially come or what could potentially happen, just attacking what you're looking at. And it seemed like over and over and over they were clicking face. And so I thought that was a chance for IL Kid to boost up and guarantee victory. But the double protect happened, and Ian took a 1-0 victory. So congrats to Ian. He made the right plays that he had to make to get the win. Whether it was a bit of chance involved or not, he still made the optimal play that got him the W. He continues to use Necrozma poorly. Oh, over and over again. But his use of Torn T is phenomenal. He's played great with Torn T, and Alkid played well. I thought it just I don't think that these two players should be happy with playing well. I think they're much better than well, um, and very seriously expect in future weeks that they will not play well. They will play great.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about earlier, any player, even the best, can have an off game. And I don't think that this was necessarily. We're being really nitpicky here, only because we can, because we know how fantastic these players are on a normal day. So we're allowed to get a little bit more nitpicky with them because just because of that fact. So
Sure.
I'm sure they'll go back to playing A+ games probably for the rest of this season.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem as if that is not in question to me that they will um, go right back to playing great and just doing better things. Like the turn 38. The last thing I want to point out in this match. He's got the Sharpedo versus the Swampert Earth Powers. Instead of scalding for a potential torn or ice beaming for a potential torn, he just Earth Powers again and seals his fate in a loss. It just, I don't know. I don't know. They're better than this. Both of them are better than this. And I suspect they will play better than this next week.
Yeah. Well, moving on from Brad being the disappointed parent of two children, we have match number 5, which was Cyril versus TCP, and this was this was a really fun match. And this was a really interesting match because TCP was 8-0 earlier, and now he's going 8-2. So this is the second loss in a row. And last week I did say that TCP was locked into playoffs. Actually, if you're in the Discord, you can see I made a whole post about it. I spent an entire hour figuring out there is one very highly specific circumstance full of tons of 6-0s that TCP can maybe not make it. It's probably not happening. TCP pretty much has made it, but there's a chance. Regardless, this game had some really interesting tech from Cyril. I mean, first off, just like in the earlier match, and I'm blanking on names completely, and I don't know why. So I'm just going to ignore what I was going to say. Anyway, Wish was important for a previous match. It was really important for Cyril this week as well. Florges played a very important role in taking a lot of the special hits from things like Manaphy and stuff like that to wish up things like the Cophagregis, get in Mega Blastoise safely. I believe a Wish Pass was maybe passed to Avlug at some point. But regardless, Cyril managed to win this game, I think, because of a couple major reasons. One of the really interesting ones was Cophagregis had Toxic Spikes, and Toxic Spikes is one of those moves where sometimes, I mean, there are 3 types that completely don't care about it. There's Steel, there's Flying, and then Poison even removes it for completely free. So sometimes Toxic Spikes just really isn't that good. Sometimes Toxic Spikes isn't prepped for, and it wins the game on its own. And I think that was one of these weeks, because Cophagregis just got up 2 layers of spikes and was able to chip down pretty much everything because of it. And additionally, Cophagregis has this ability Mummy. Well, TCP did not account for that when he created the Megalopony set of Fake Out Last Resort.
Yeah.
That meant that anytime Megalopony came out, it was a very, very free switch into Cophagregis because Megalopony was forced to fake out before it could Last Resort, gain the Mummy ability, lose Scrappy, can no longer hit Cophagregis. So pretty much completely blanking one of the best Megas in the game with that right there. And between that and the chip, Florges also had a really cool Worry Seed tech, which got rid of Slowbro's Regenerator on one occasion, allowed for some more chips. So just a couple cool things like that was able to secure the victory for Cyril. I think a very well played match from her.
This is a weird match, and I'll explain why I think this is a weird match. It's not because an 8-1 team lost fairly handily. It's because, in my opinion, Sarl, whatever, I always get it wrong, had the perfect prep and tried to throw it away. Let me explain that. She had the Cophagregus, or excuse me, the Crocodile, which is a great swap into Dracozolt. You can talk about Klefki, but Dracozolt, in my opinion, has been TCP's most impactful mon, game in, game out, throughout every match. Dracozolt's been better than Klefki. That's my opinion. It's got an Intimidate Crocodile. What's she do turn 1? She risks it. She risks it on a Colberberry Slowbro, taking a Scald, which took 82% and burned it. Now she's got a Florges, of course, that has the aromatherapy, but you can't wish into a 12%. It's almost impossible to wish into a 12%.
Yeah, and while spikes were up, it was literally impossible.
It just, like, she threw away her Dracozolt switch in turn 1. And then Cophagregus took a 60-70% from Dracozolt. 68%. I'm just not saying it. Took a 68% from Dracozolt. She almost threw away her Lopunny swap in because she lost her, or she took such a big hit on her Crocodile swap in. Like, there was a lot of things that happened in this match where Sorrel took what looked like a team preview lead and very nearly threw it away.
Yeah, that could be fair, although I also think that Avlug and Coffegregious, because Coffegregious was an Iron Defense body press,
Mhm.
along with Mummy taking away Hustle and Iron Defense, it could somewhat soft check the Dracozolt, which we saw it do one time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of agree with you that losing that because of no Crocodile hurts. Avlog is also very, very highly physically defensive and had the Avalanche to get rid of the
Yes.
Dracozolt at any point.
Absolutely.
So,
Not all was lost, but I thought it was extremely risky for very minimal return. You already said all the good stuff, so you kind of took away my option to say good things. So I'm highlighting the stuff that didn't get mentioned because you already talked about how well Sorrow played the match. And when we were talking about featured set of the week or featured match of the week, I made the comment that I don't think this one will qualify because even though it was a 3-0, it felt much heavier as mid game showed up and particularly end game showed up. I thought that TCP was getting outmatched pretty heavily. And that's, of course, my opinion. But in the way that I was watching the battle flow out, even at one point, I think TCP had like a 4-3 lead around mid game. It just seemed to me that the sets Sorrel had were just better equipped for the moment.
yeah,
And it's not like TCP to miss stuff like Mummy. When a U-turn Lopunny probably would have been much better. It's not like him to miss those kind of things. So I'm not sure. Maybe he had a tough week. Maybe it was a short weekend prep, or I'm not sure.
yeah,
Um,
there was actually an extension on this match to Monday, so I could very easily see that it's very likely that TCP just didn't have the time for a lot of prep this week.
yeah, yeah. I mean that's very likely and would seem to be the case. But at 8-1, that bye week isn't guaranteed, and now at 8-2, that bye week is put in question. If he loses his next match, or potentially even two matches, he will lose that bye week almost certainly. Uh, so a little too early to have a lax spirit, um, and that may not have been it. He may have just thought that it was worth bringing the set anyway, but a pretty convincing victory for Sorrow.
Yeah,
Um, the next match is yours,
indeed it
right?
is. Yep.
You and the old man, cripple, barely alive static. Barely alive. Um, gosh, what do you say here, really? The match of Cobalion, even though Cobalion was the only mon of yours to die. Um, the stealth rocks were so vital. The Cobalion speed tier that it set was so nice. Getting the early chip off on Araquanid, which seems to be a key mon for Static this year. Seems like to me, in matches where Araquanid has lived and dealt big damage, Static's had a pretty good path to victory. It got chipped down pretty early, and Life Orb Lando seemed to do a decent amount of damage. But eventually, a stinking Deontay set up and got a pretty clean sweep. Not without event. Static had was it a trick rotom this week? I think it was a trick rotom
Yes.
that caused a little bit of confusion and chaos. I think he actually ended up tricking again later on, swapping a couple of different items to
Mm-hmm.
the point that I think Victini ended up with a Choppleberry, which
Yep.
is you know, questionable at best. It was just It was a fun match to watch personally, my view, but it wasn't a very close match. It was not a very close match. It's static at 5-5 -7. That -7 being the key feature there. 5-5, he's still very much in the playoff race, but at -7, he's going to need a couple of big wins, or he's going to need a full game advantage over the next competitor if he's going to make playoffs. It's getting kind of sketchy for him at this point.
Yeah. This match I thought was really interesting because I'm gonna be honest. I thought in prep that I had the matchup pretty handily. Like you said, Rocks was pretty hard for Static to deal with. Rotom was there with Defog, but in general, it did really well against Mega Pidgeot, an Araquanid that isn't bringing heavy duty boots. It's going to hit hard, and it's a really good move against Static's team. Uh,
Mhm,
and Cobalion couldn't do much damage this week. I mean, Aegislash was there, Araquanid is there, stuff
mhm,
like that. So Cobalion isn't doing much, but just getting up rocks and pivoting out and getting some chip is good enough. And then I had some really good breakers in Landorus Therian, V-Create Victini, or V-Create, uh, and the setup Diancie. But
yeah,
once Static started throwing around those tricks, first, Rotom tricked a Choice Scarf onto my support Kangaskhan, and
mhm,
that pretty much annihilated Kangaskhan's reason to live.
yeah,
Uh, and then, also the second trick, tricking my Colberberry from Victini, was pretty impactful too because there was a turn where Grimmsnarl was in, and it was a dual screen Grimmsnarl, and I was down a defense because of V Create, and I was really terrified because I had Colberberry for that exact situation where I could have actually clicked Flame Charge and probably just swept from there with Victini at +1 speed. However, I was terrified of Sucker Punch, so I was forced out because of that. And
mhm,
then the very last thing, Aegislash was an Adrenaline Orb Sword Stance set that if Grimmsnarl had been Light Clay and screens had still been up, that Aegislash probably just won the game right there. And even without, it still had a potential roll to kill my Landorus Therian and sweep from there.
mhm,
And it also had the potential to flinch it. However, Static went for a second sword stance in front of Landorus Therian, thinking that the screens were still up, and that miscalculation allowed me to get rid of it and get rid of the chance of Static sweeping. But that was still really, really terrifying. You said that it wasn't a close match, but I don't know that that's necessarily true because Aegislash was pretty dang close to sweeping there.
yeah. And I mean, that's completely fair. That's completely fair. It and I say it's not a close match is because Static, in that moment where he had the Aegislash, he had the +1/+1, the speed, and the Adrenaline Orb, and then the Swords Dance, which ended up being a +1 because Intimidate. In that moment, he was not prepared to sweep. He was not prepared to sweep at that moment. Um, if he would have high rolled, and I think it would have been a max high roll to kill the Lando, I don't think it could have killed um, Mandibuzz.
No.
And I don't necessarily think it was going to kill the Landers at +1. So at that moment, his play was to Swords Dance, hoping that you would potentially swap out, maybe do something weird or make a mistake. Um, in that moment, he was not prepared to win. Had he have had the light clay, then obviously, I think the match would have went very different. But he didn't have it. And in that exact moment where he got to the point of opportunity, which good for him, he got to a point of opportunity. A lot of coaches don't necessarily get to a point of opportunity. He did, and he very clearly could have 6-0 swept you, but he didn't because he wasn't prepared for that moment. And that's why, in my opinion, it wasn't a very close match. I suppose if you look at it in a different light, it was close in that if he would have brought a different item, maybe it's a different match. But it wasn't because he didn't.
Yeah, okay, that's certainly fair. Although I do think even if the Aegislash had gone for the attack, if it had gotten rid of the Landorus, yes, it wouldn't have swept right there. But I still think that Static had a really good chance to win at that point. Of course, that's getting into a lot of theoremoning that just doesn't need to
Hmm.
happen. But I was terrified, even if it wasn't a close match on paper. I was terrified out of
Yeah.
my wits.
I mean, as you should be. An Aegislash that gets up to a decent amount of speed is awful. I mean, the dude has like what 140 attack, 140 special attack.
Yep.
Um, it's a horrifying mon. The main holdback on Aegislash is that it's slow as snot, but when the dude gets, Trick Room or maybe Autonomaz or something like that, it can be a real problem. And then this is also, I think, the third week we've seen Adrenaline Orb against your Lando T.
Third week if you count the second league I was in. Second
Ah,
week, second week
second week,
in this league.
second week here. We're in too many of the same leagues, I guess.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's a common item against a Lando T because if you draft a Lando T, you're almost certainly bringing Lando T. And Adrenaline Orb always works because it's not like Lando T is going to be anything but Intimidate. Um, so good to see Static making use of a good item. The Trick Rotom was great. Honestly, the Rotom was Static's best mon this week.
oh yeah.
It constantly caused chaos. But rocks were an issue for Static, and rocks continued to get up from Cabaleon. And then the combination of Deontay, Victini, and Lando were just too much. They were just too much.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It was. I think this is honestly this and my game against. I should really stop putting myself into positions where I need to remember names. Oh gosh. It's the same exact name too. I'm gonna go back in the slides just to see this. I need to.
Nemo? Are you talking about Nemo?
I'm talking about Dravos.
Bravos.
These two games, the one versus Dravos with the Sylveon lead, and then this one, have
Hmm.
honestly been two incredibly fun matches. However they went,
Yeah,
but that's enough about me. We have a featured match this week.
we do.
That is up for you.
Lille, obviously, as you can see from the slide, got the 2-0 win. But there's a lot of really fun things in here. A lot of really fun things in here. What's one of the things we love in the ASL? We love low tier featured mons doing cool stuff. When's the last time you've seen an Alolan Executor get 4 kills? I'm gonna wait. When was it?
I mean, you can
Because
wait forever.
I think it was the moment you watched this replay, whether that be right now or whether that be when you watched it maybe in server. But that's the moment you've seen an Alolan Executor get 4 kills. I bet you $100 bill right now. Um, gosh, I mean Glade a 3-1's not all that big of a deal. But to see the Alolan Executor work to such perfection, and it all came down to the Alolan Executor. I'm skipping a lot of turns, which I know the replay is rolling. There was a back and forth. It was a good match. It was a clean match, and I'm sure you can tell them all about how competitive it was, because it was. But what it ultimately just came down to was this Alolan Executors and the Rhydon speed EVs. And that's what I am interested in. If Rhydon had however much speed it needed, but I don't think it needed much to outspeed this Alolan Executor, Melone would have won this match. Lille would have been 5-5, and the playoff race would have just been even more confusing than it already is. Uh, but it was a well played match. It was a fun match. It was a tight match. And, one reflection moment is, Malone's season hasn't gone the way he would like for it to. He's 2-18, minus 21. You'd like to swap those two numbers and you'd feel pretty good if you were 8-2 plus 21. Not a great season for Malone. But how many matches have we sat here and said, Malone didn't play this bad? I mean, a
It's
handful of matches, right?
Yeah, it's been a good number.
There's a lot of matches where had things have played out a little bit differently, Malone could be having a very different season. I think he has a pretty good team, especially with some of the transactions. Mega Gallade is just unbelievably good. I don't think that this season is reflective of a 2-8 for Malone. He's been in some brawls that have mostly not gone his way. Maybe there's some things he can do on his end to improve that. But great played match from both. It was tight. But Lille won it in prep, actually, believe it or not. He won it on his, executor speed, which who would have thought that a match would come down to, is my executor going to be faster than Rhydon? That's probably not usually your win con plan, but that's what it was in this particular match.
Yeah. On the point you were making about Malone, in particular, I know that our review is certainly not indicative of how well someone is doing in a season or not. But Malone, despite being 2-8, has been in a total of 3 of our featured matches, and we try to make the featured matches some of the most competitive ones out of the week. So that alone shows just a little bit. I mean, that's 30% of our featured matches out of 14 coaches. He has 30% showtime in these featured matches. So he's doing really well, I think. It's just
Mhm.
really close. So many
Yeah.
times, really close. But this match in particular, I saw it as, I mean, of course, that last bit with the Rhydon and the Alolan Executor was very, very important. But I saw it as a match of, can Corviknight be chipped down so that Mega Gallade can go ham? Because that's really what Melone was wanting to do the entire time, is just let that Mega Gallade go loose. The problem is the Corviknight was taking like 40 something from close combat. And Corviknight has pressure, and
Mhm.
close combat only has 8 PP. So that meant that Melone was really struggling to save the close combat and take down the Corviknight at the same time. And eventually, Mega Gallade just ran out of close combats, which was probably, I mean, I can't say that it necessarily would have been the game maker, but if close combat was still a move that existed, I think there's a good chance that Malone won that game.
Potentially, yeah. It was there was like I said, there was too much in this match to try to break down every turn. I mean, it was essentially a 60 turn match where a lot of back and forth, a lot of swapping out to this thing where he made all this move, and it was just very competitive. It was a chess match. It was a turn for turn. What you hope to see. I mean, this is what you hope to see, where two guys are playing extremely well, and Lille got it done. He got it done. The pressure taking those close combats away ended up being extremely important. Right on, not speed creeping executor obviously was extremely important. The Tangela going down kind of unnecessarily to the flamethrower maybe was one of the plays in the match that were unnecessarily dangerous. But overall, really fun match. I mean, this is kind of what you're hoping for, you know,
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
Pokemon fan, as someone who watches a lot of games, as someone certainly who I've seen every game ever played in the history of the ASL. This is what you're wanting. You're wanting competitive, tight, close battles, and this was certainly that. If you did not know that Melone was 2-7 and LA was 5-4, you would not walk away from this battle thinking Melone is 13th in the rankings. You wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly would never guess it myself.
Yeah, it was a great match. Loved watching it. I mean, certainly, we obviously gave it featured set of the week, our featured match of the week. And Lil A's been on a bunch of these featured match of the weeks too. Maybe this is his second or maybe his third time. Um, but a good season for them both, at least in terms of producing quality battles. And just a heads up from Melone, man. Keep after it because a couple things go different this season, man. A couple results go different, and you're in the playoff hunt right there with everybody else.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I don't think Melone would ever give up in this league because, I mean, you can't just give up the title of being the oldest 15-year-old in the channel. Uh,
For those that don't know, Melone has more games played in the ASL than I do. And I founded this thing. He's got more games played in the ASL than Ian does because Ian and I have both taken a season off at some point. And Malone's been here since he joined in the middle of season one.
yeah, been here the entire dang time, or close to it.
Yep.
So, also this week, we have a decent number of transactions because, I mean, this is the last week that transactions were available.
But the transactions were not decent, just to be clear. And I'm not referring to all of them. I'm referring to one.
Yeah, we will. I'm sure we're gonna have. Uh, Brad's gonna have a long talk for someone. I'm sure. We aren't quite there yet.
No.
First, I have to have a long talk with someone because Ian gave up Heracross for Conkelder.
Yes.
And I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna be straight up honest that I'm gonna be really biased in this. I think that this was a poor trade that was done because Ian couldn't see the potential in this fantastic bug.
Mhm.
There, like in my match against him, Heracross was probably one of the Pokemon I was the most scared of. Of course, you have Tornadus Theory and you have Nihilego, you have a bunch of stuff. I was terrified of Heracross because you put a Flame Orb on it, you can't switch into it. You put a Scarf on it, and it's going to Revenge Kill everything. It has insanely powerful stabs. It's going to get a lot of work done. Now, don't get me wrong. Conkelder can do a lot of that stuff, and it has Mach Punch and stuff like that. But I think that the Bug Stab for stuff like Psychic types and stuff like that is really, really good. Uh, I'm going to let you eventually sing the praises of this trade, if there are any. But from my view on it, I'm really sad to see Heracross go. I think it was really good.
Sure. Well, Ian's having a really good season. I think he's 7-3, right? So I won't spend too much time questioning his judgment. I'll just say this. Historically, throughout many a season, Ian has continued to tell me over and over again that Tornadus T is trash. Tornadus T is one of the worst mons. He hates it. He thinks it's terrible. He would never use it. It's currently ranked fourth in MVP standings, or at least in kill leaders, and it's ranked fourth right now. And he has continued to tell me throughout the years that this is a terrible mon. Obviously, he has no idea what he's talking about. Clearly, he's good at playing mons because he's 7-3. But as far as his ability to evaluate the individual mons, clearly he's just off his rocker. Because Tornadus T is unbelievable. It was unbelievable before it got boots. It was unbelievable before it got Nasty Plot. It's just also still unbelievable now. So for him not seeing the beauty of a Heracross surprises me none whatsoever because he has a very different way of thinking about mons than I do. Ian and I are good friends. We started this league together. We've hung out and talked together for years now, and we have prepped together I think once because I do not believe in the style that he chooses to employ. I don't think it's the best way to win games, and he doesn't do it the way I do it. And so I'm sure it will work. I'm sure he has his reasons. But, we don't often do not see eye to eye when it comes to this game that we've poured years worth of work into making a community around.
Yeah, and I can certainly respect having different views on things. I mean, just before this, we were talking about Corviknight, and I was talking about I don't want to believe this thing is good. So, I mean, sometimes stuff like that happens where you just have a view set of just you can maybe be a little blind to some of the good things about a Pokemon. And of course, Ian's been prepping with Heracross, so not gonna be completely blind to it, but just not seeing it the same way as other people is understandable.
Well, and that being said, I love Conkeldurr. I think Conkeldurr is wonderful. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is a horrible transaction because I think Conkeldurr is always a great mon. Um, but Ian did not utilize Heracross this season or give it an opportunity to be successful.
Yeah, I think he used it like one time and let it. Actually, I think he's used it twice and let it get demolished by unnecessary fire moves both times.
Yeah.
But
Next, right?
yeah,
Hmm. Static dropped Ditto to pick up Meloetta. Great transaction in my book. Ditto is a mon that I personally will never draft. I have no interest in it. I would rather pick up an E tier as opposed to have Ditto on my team. It has its uses. It does force you to prep a certain kind of way. That being said, on its own, it has zero competitive ability. You are 100% dependent upon your opponent to make Ditto work. I don't like that. That is not okay for me. Meloetta, on the other hand, is very powerful, very strong, does not die in one hit to virtually anything, um, is just annoying in a million ways, bulkier than it deserves to be, and one of its super effective should be super effective in Ghost type. Can't hit it because it's normal. Greatmon is is something that I believe in. Glad to see Static dumping the Ditto, picking up something that, in my opinion, is far better.
yeah, I agree. I think that I mean, for one, if you look at this slide, you'll see how low resolution this Ditto is and realize immediately that this thing just isn't the quality that it needs to be. Uh, but if you're going to look at the actual game, Ditto, while it does force you to prep in a certain way, aka not bringing a ton of setup that isn't behind a substitute, I it seems like Ditto is just really easy to play around if you know what you're doing. Because, one, if you're wanting to bring setup, just bring substitute. Ditto can't touch you. And if you aren't bringing setup, then just, I don't know. It seems like Ditto only does really fantastically in games where the opponent isn't accounting for it properly. Uh, and it's easy to just slap on. You can slap it on as a sixth Pokemon in pretty much any game. But I do think that Meloetta has so much viability. I think it's actually really underrated. It has so many sets that it can run. It's way bulkier than you might expect it to be. Relic Song is actually Relic Song to turn it into a fighting type. I've seen that. I've seen sets like that do really well on multiple occasions. U-turn for good momentum. It's just a really good Pokemon in my book. I love this transaction.
Yeah, great transaction. Didn't happen soon enough. Made a mistake drafting Ditto. I don't like Ditto. I don't think it's good. Um, I don't think it has. I don't think Ditto has competitive viability at a high level. I
Yeah,
think Ditto can be very good if you're in a rookie league, if you're facing people that aren't high level battlers, but at a high level competitive use, I don't think Ditto is a mon that should be used.
yeah, I agree with that. It can do well. on certain occasions, but it can just be played around way too easily.
Yeah.
So the next transaction, this is Shadow, and Shadow is actually the one who traded Conkelder for Heracross and then dropped that Heracross for Buzzwole. And
Mhm.
I actually like this transaction a good amount. Shadow, I think his team really appreciates Buzzwole as just. I mean, Conkelder is going to hit hard. Don't get me wrong. Conkelder is going to hit really hard.
Yep.
But Buzzwole, it can hit hard and it can break through multiple things really easily. It has that additional stab and bug type. I don't believe Shadow had the bug type covered on the team, so picking that up as like an earthquake resist and stuff like that is pretty good. Shadow has been struggling a little bit with grass types,
Mhm.
and so this is a perfect counter to that. No grass type wants to switch into this swole beast.
Yep.
I just really like this transaction, but I know you probably have more thoughts on it because I heard that you are the one who convinced him to do it.
Well, that's not inherently true at all, in my opinion,
Okay.
my estimation. He did uh, pick my brain on some things that he could maybe make a final move on in regards to his Heracross. He did not ask me my opinion about his other transactions, just to be clear. He did ask me about this one, and what he had said is that he wanted an earthquake switch in. That's what he wanted. And so he was specifically looking for advice in regards to an earthquake switch in. I don't know a better one. I mean, that's really kind of my response is uh, unless you want a flying type or a levitate user, um, I don't know that there is a better mon to switch into earthquakes that can be hit by them than Buzzwole.
Yeah, I think that Buzzwole is one of the best Earthquake switch-ins and also one of the best knockoff switch-ins in the game, which Shadow's team, like, stuff like Melodic, yes,
Yeah,
after it gets the Flame Orb proc, it's okay being knocked off, but a lot of people are probably going to bring that knockoff hoping to get it on a Switch, so having something else to just really comfortably take knockoff all day is really nice.
yeah, and I mean, Buzzwole has recovery. Buzzwole helps with, as you already said, just repeating what you said, the grass weakness. Shadow has tended to lose to or almost lose to grass types over and over and over again. Buzzwole maybe isn't very bulky, especially, but can certainly demolish a grass type if it finds one.
Yeah. So I really like this transaction. Uh, and let's go on to the next transaction. And I'm going to go ahead and get this one first so that I can let you go first on the second one because I have a feeling I won't need to say anything on the second one. This transaction, Bolton dropped for Cryogonal. I'm not going to spend too long on it. I think, in general, if I was to look at this transaction alone, it's decent. I don't know that it's a terrible transaction. It makes the speed tiers kind of janky because Boltund was a really good. I believe Boltund's 116. Uh, and then Cryogonal is 105. Well, 116 is a really good speed tier for Shadow's team. Uh, but Shadow has Kartana at 109, and 105 isn't really covering much more. So there's that. I don't think Shadow needed a rapid spinner or a defogger at all. I've put his team into my prep planner, and I believe there's only like two Pokemon on his entire team that don't have some form of removal. It is insane the amount of rapid spin and defog Shadow's team has. So it seems weird, but at the same time, Cryogonal can do some stuff. It can sponge some special hits. It has good recovery. It's acceptable.
Yeah, just to clear up, Bolton has 121 speed.
Oh, 121.
Um,
Yeah, that's much better.
yeah,
That's
so
that's a much bigger
that's
difference than I
actually
thought.
a really fabulous speed tier to hit. And so he's losing momentum here. He's losing a huge amount of speed. The difference between 121 and 105 may not be a lot numerically, but in terms of speed tiers, it is vastly different. Um, so a really significant loss here. Maybe he wanted to go bulkier, but in all truthfulness, he just wanted to replace his ice type. I mean, that's I think the purpose of this transaction. I can't see why on God's green earth he would make it otherwise, because I do think Bolton is significantly better than Cryogonal.
Yep. So on that note, why don't you talk about this next one?
You know, on paper, it's a fine transaction. He drops Mr. Rhyme for double. On paper, that's fine. But if you've been watching this series throughout the season, and you've watched us go through replay after replay, if I was to just say, okay, name me the 5 most impactful Mons of the season, you couldn't make the list without putting Mr. Rhyme on it. You couldn't. You would probably mention maybe a clef key. Um, you would potentially mention our current kill leader, the Tapu Lele. Maybe you mention a handful of things, but you could not talk about the 5 best Mons this season without talking about Mr. Rhyme. And furthermore, we're looking at a team that hasn't had the immense amount of success. Shadow has had some success. He is 4-6, which is not terrible and is not completely out of the playoff race, although he probably needs to win out. But his most impactful Mon, quite frankly, throughout the season has been Mr. Rhyme. Mr. Rhyme has performed for him. Now, maybe there's been a freeze or two involved. Fair enough. Maybe his opponents prep screens when you've got a screen cleaner, Mr. Rhyme. Maybe all of that's true. But the simple fact is that this Mon has maybe been Shadow's best. We've criticized Shadow for how he's used Hydreigon. We've criticized Shadow for how he's used Kartana. Have we criticized Shadow for how he used Mr. Rhyme? Not once. And it has potentially been his most impactful Mon in the weeks that it's come, and he essentially dropped it for Cryogonal.
Yeah.
I just, I don't see it. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Sometimes Mons work for certain coaches. I have a history. Matter of fact, Moth and I were just talking about this the other day. I have a history with Scizor. I have played my Season 9 championship in the ASL. I used base form Scizor. I had a Mega Charizard X in that season, and Scizor had more kills that season than Mega Charizard X. Performed phenomenally for me. I just played a league that's not the ASL where I had a perfect season. I went 13-0, swept the whole season. Scizor was arguably my best or second best Mon on that team. Scizor just always shows up for me. I know how to use it. I know how to work around difficult situations with it. I know how to build for it. I know how to draft for it. I'm a very good Scizor user. Mr. Ryan was working on a team that is at a point in the season where it needs things to work. He gave it up for a Mon. What does Cryogonal bring to the table, really, that Mr. Rhyme doesn't? I don't know.
A little more speed, but like not a great position speed tier wise for the
But he
team.
lost speed overall.
Yeah.
I don't get it. And it's not like I know I've joked and I've said like Mr. Rhyme's A tier, Mr. Rhyme's A tier because it's done amazing things, but I genuinely do not get it. The logic isn't there for me. I don't see it. It doesn't make sense. I thought this was an extremely poor move from a team that it's in a position where it needs things to go right. I think this is a step in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I think you've talked enough to fulfill all of my thoughts on dropping Mr. Rhyme. So as far as picking up Double, uh, I wish I could say better things about that too, because if when baton pass is allowed, Dubwall is easily one of the best E tiers ever because it has it has Cotton Guard, and I believe it has Sword Stance and stuff like that. It has a lot of good things if you're passing it to something else. But I don't like Dubwool. I just don't think it's good because you have Cotton Guard Body Press, you have Sword Stance Body Slam. Do you have anything else? I don't think Double does anything else.
I mean, it's going to run Cotton Guard, Body Press, Toxic Rest pretty much
Yeah.
every week,
So
right?
if you can bring a special attacker, then you beat it. If you can bring something that hits with fire moves for the Fluffy, you can probably do some good damage to it. I don't know. I don't know about that one. Maybe Shadow has a plan for it, but I don't know about it. So there is one last transaction here from Shadow, and this one is Stonejourner for Togedemaru. And I actually really like this one to completely change tone. I I don't particularly care for Stonejourner. I think it's passable, but just barely. It can do rock type things. It can stealth rock. It can. I think it has body press. It has some really good defense, but it has paper thin special defense. It has awful speed, and it's not on a trick room team. It's just not going to perform terribly well. Togedemaru isn't a powerhouse by any means. It's not very bulky at all. It's only got 96, 98 speed, one of those two. But with stuff like you can run like Iron Barbs, Rocky Helmet, Spiky Shield, and get so much chip damage, or you can do Super Fang. It has Nuzzle and Thunder Wave, and unfortunately no spikes. I think that would make Togedemaru absolutely amazing. But in general, it's just really good utility wise, and I could see it making a difference in games that Stonejourner just wouldn't be having the same impact.
Sure. In a 1-for-1 sense, I'm with you. In a 1-for-1 trade, Togedemaru has overall versatility and viability over Stonejourner. But this is not a 1-for-1 deal. The reason that he needed Togedemaru is because he dropped his Bolton. The reason that he dropped his Bolton is still unfounded, at least in my opinion. So, in a vacuum, I agree. 1-for-1, Togedemaru is going to probably do more week in, week out than Stonejourner. This isn't a vacuum. This is a series of transactions where he's replacing his electric type, and I don't know how a Togedemaru is going to replace the value of the Bolton. I don't see it.
And I will add to that, another thing that I don't quite understand is why do you need to replace your electric type when you already had Rotom Frost that was actually performing pretty well as an electric type? Why did you need to pick back up the second one? So that's maybe a little perplexing, but I don't know. I don't put as much emphasis on the picking up of Togedemaru in the whole series. Uh, I don't know. It looks almost like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks almost like Shadow was really concerned about an earthquake switch in because, uh, I mean, picked up the Buzzwole, picked up Cryogonal with Levitate. That's probably the thing that Shadow was seeing on Cryogonal over Mr. Rime is Levitate, which I still don't believe facilitates the transaction. But picked up both of those, so a great resist and an immunity, and then maybe almost looked at that as reason enough to put a quad weak to ground thing on the team.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, he has a Hydreigon. He has a Flamor Melodic. He's got to have Pout on. He picked up a Buzzwole. Um, I personally would have liked to have seen his transactions stop at Buzzwole. I
Yeah,
think Buzzwole trade's fine. Everything after that, in my opinion, is a jarbled up mess. And that I know that that's not kind or covered up or polite, but that's just the way I see it. It just doesn't make a lick of sense in my book.
yeah, and I can see where you're coming from on it. I don't know. With these transactions, one thing I will say, we are looking at them from an outside perspective. We haven't
Hmm.
been the ones using the teams. Uh, we're just looking at it from our opinions,
Yep.
and a lot of times these transactions do have very specific reasons. There may be some specific matchups coming up that Shadow is looking for because Shadow is 4-6. So maybe there are some matchups where Earthquake is going to be a huge problem or something like that. And so once the Cryogonal for that, maybe there are some specific tech that Shadow is looking at using, or maybe it's just a case of wanting to have some fun with the last few weeks. Whatever the case is, don't let our criticism stop you from enjoying the Pokemon that you purposely picked up. Even if we don't agree with it at all, you had your reasons, so I'm looking forward to you doing it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly he's got a lot to prove at this point. I mean, he dropped the best mon in the league for nothing, so you know the ticket's cashed, buddy. You better pay up. Let's see how it goes.
And immediately, Brad taking me trying to be positive and turning it into pressure. I love it.
Well, also you have to take into account that we are not unbiased commentators that are paid to do this. Shadow and I have been friends for years, um, and I've helped Shadow build teams. I've drafted with Shadow. We've prepped together. Um, I know him, and he knows me, so I don't mind saying direct things about his choices because he's a friend of mine. I wouldn't be as hard on someone that maybe I wasn't friends with. I don't mind punching him in the gut. Not at all.
Okay, well, that's fair. Uh,
Yeah, even
but
when he does make terrible choices.
well, with that, that has been. I'm sure this is the longest review we've had. Uh,
Stravos' fault.
yeah, yeah, that's kind of true. 4 transactions and 4 very interesting ones at that took up probably a long portion of the time. But regardless, I hope that you enjoyed our review of everything. The phrase for this week, I'm going to go ahead and say critical criticism from cynical cynicists. If you can
I like
type
it.
that all out, then props to you for that alone. Uh,
Indeed, we'll mention you in the next video.
yeah, we'll go ahead and do that because I've noticed there's been a little bit of a drop off of people actually looking for that clout. We got like 3 of them the first time and 1 since.
Someone says it, they type it out, they will be mentioned at the beginning of next week's video,
All right, so you actually have some incentive now to watch this entire thing.
which we put in at the very last of the video.
Yes. Also, please don't skip to the very end of the video for that because that is cheating, and you, sir, are a terrible person if you are the one listening to this and have done that. Regardless, do you have anything else to add, Brad?
No, Shadow sucks. That's all I know.
All right, well, with that, we will see you all next time.
All right.